Welcome back. Listen, we only have 2 sections left in this Lumetri color panel, so we are making our way through it, okay? And you are here for it, and I am glad you are here for it. All right, so the next section is called HSL secondary. So what does that mean? Well, by the time you've reached this section in the Lumetri color panel, because the idea in this panel is that you're gonna work your way from top to bottom through the section. So by the time you've gotten here, we've made a lot of color adjustments to our whole image. And when we make adjustments to our whole image, those are called primary adjustments. But maybe now there's a secondary section, a little isolated section that we want to manipulate the color for on its own. So for example, maybe we boosted the saturation for our whole image, and in doing that, we gave ourselves a really bad spray tan look. And so that is where this HSL secondary section is going to help us fix only our skin. Now, why is it called HSL though? Well, HSL stands for hue, which means color, saturation, and lightness. And that's because those are the 3 things that we're going to be adjusting in this section. And honestly, those are the 3 things we've been adjusting in one way or another in all of the sections in this panel, no matter what setting or slider we were using. Anyway, let me show you how to actually use this section. I've got this image here, and I've already made some primary adjustments to the whole image just to make these colors pop. But by doing that, I have made our subject's face here look way too saturated, and it might be the wrong color, but it ain't looking natural. So I want to fix the color settings on our subject's face without messing up all the other stuff I've already done to this image. And so the first thing that I want to do here is I want to select just our subject's face so that we can just make adjustments to it. And so to do that, I'm going to key it. And keying in video production just means that you are separating or isolating or selecting just a certain part of your image so that you can manipulate it. All right, so to key or to select our subject's face here, first we're going to take our eyedropper, and then we're going to go to the program monitor, and we're going to sample her skin here. After we did that, you may have noticed that these sliders down here have changed. They used to be all thin and in the middle, and now they've spread out and moved spots. And so now these sliders are telling us that the skin that we just sampled has this hue or this color, it has this saturation level, and it has this lightness level. And if we go down here and check this box where it says color gray, then it's going to show us exactly which pixels that we have just keyed or selected. So everything that we selected is in color, and everything that is not selected is here in gray. And so clearly we do not have all of her face selected here. And so to fix that, I could click on this eyedropper with a little plus sign, and then I could sample another part of her face to add that to our key. Or I could also go here and move these sliders to adjust our selection. So I could adjust this slider here to grab more pixels with those hues, but at a different lightness level, because I want to make sure that I'm getting all the highlights and the shadows on the skin on her face. And now maybe I'll drag this hue slider to the left just a little bit because I don't want to get so much yellow in her hair. I just want her skin. Okay. Next, I want you to notice that the edges of our selection here, or our key here, are looking kind of blocky and pixelated. And so to smooth out that noise, I'm just gonna go over to this slider here called denoise, and I'm gonna drag it up. Then I'm gonna go down here and increase the blur, and that is going to feather the edges of our selection so that our selection blends nicely with the rest of our image. And that way, when we make adjustments to the selection, it's going to blend with everything else in our shot. Now again, what's showing up here in color is what we've got keyed or selected for secondary correction in this section. And so that means that any corrections that I make in this HSL secondary section are only going to be applied to our subject's skin that we've got selected. So they're not going to mess up the color that we've already done. But now that we've got her skin selected, how do we know what to adjust to make her skin look nice and natural? Well, we're going to use a scope to help us out with that. So first, I'm going to recheck this box that says color gray so that only our skin is showing up in the program monitor. And now I'm going to pull up a scope that's going to help us see the color levels that are in our selection that's shown here and make sure that they are on point. Now the scope that we're going to use for this is called the Vectorscope YUV. And I know you're like, Mary, this is so many acronyms. What does YUV stand for? You know, I looked it up, but it don't make no sense. And I got very confused. I don't want to confuse you. And so what you need to remember here is that the Vectorscope YUV is why you will be looking very good. I'm like way too proud of that, y'all. But anyway, you can also remember that the Vectorscope YUV is round, it's a round scope, and it's the one that's gonna fix your face, which is also round. Anyway, let's talk about how to read this thing. So in the middle of our Vectorscope YUV, you'll see this white puff of smoke, and this represents the pixels in our image. So when these pixels are close to the center of the scope, they're gonna be less saturated. And so if I have a black and white image with 0 saturation, then all the pixels are gonna be right smack dab in the middle of our Vectorscope YUV. But the more saturated our pixels get, then the more that white puff of smoke is going to move out toward the edges of our scope. And speaking of the edges, you will notice that we've got colors here. So we've got yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, and green. And so the more green our shot has in it, the more this pixel cloud is going to be close to the green, The more magenta a shot has in it, the more the pixel cloud moves toward magenta, and so on. And so that means that this scope, the Vectorscope YUV, is all about helping us make sure that the hue of our shot or the color of our shot is right and the saturation of our shot is right. And those are two things that are really important if you want skin to look right. So first, let's talk about what color skin should be.
Wait, are you really going to answer that? Because I think we should definitely be celebrating the fact that everybody has different skin colors.
Actually, I used to think that, but that was before I learned more about color correction, and I found out I was wrong. Not about celebrating diversity, obviously that is beautiful, but about everybody having different skin colors, because it turns out we all have the exact same skin color. So if you don't believe me, just look at this. So if I mask out the skin on this woman's face, then you're gonna notice that all of the pixels in our Vectorscope now have the same hue or the same color. So they're all in this line right here between red and yellow. Now, the same thing is gonna be true if I do that for this woman's skin, if I do it for this guy's skin, if I do it for these people's skin, or for these people's skin. Didn't I try to tell you? I tried to tell you everybody has the same skin color. And so that means that this line right here on the Vectorscope YUV, this is called the skin tone line. And we can use this line to make sure that the color of anybody's skin in our videos is looking nice and natural. So if I'm wondering whether this woman's face here has too much green in it, then I can go over to my Effect Controls panel, and under the opacity effect, I can click the pen icon to mask out just the skin on her face. And I do not want to include her lips or her eyes when I'm doing this, because I want to make sure that I'm just getting those skin shades. Now our Vectorscope YUV is just going to show us the pixels that are in our mask here. And so we can see clearly that these pixels do not line up with the skin tone line. So they are coming way too far over toward this green here. And so I am just gonna go over here and adjust the tint until those pixels are all on that skin tone line. And now if we look at the before and the after, you can see that her skin is looking nice and natural and healthy. All right, so let's go back to our example here and let's check whether the skin of our subject here is on the skin tone line. So I think things are looking pretty good. We do have a few yellow pixels here that are probably coming from some of the yellow in her hair that's selected, and maybe some red pixels here that are coming from her lips, but most of the pixels are on the skin tone line, so I am feeling good about the color of her skin. But it still doesn't look right because it's too saturated. And so now let's talk about saturation levels. So we know that as this smoke cloud of pixels moves out toward the edge of our Vectorscope, that things get more saturated, right? But what are all these boxes about? Well, if you're my age, then you might remember these color bars that TV stations would sometimes play to calibrate their equipment. And if we read the Vectorscope for these color bars, then you might notice that the pixels are mostly inside these boxes and they line up with these colors here. But if I lower the saturation from 100% to 75% in our shot, then those dots move from those big outer boxes to the small inner boxes. And so these small inner boxes represent 75% saturation, and these big outer boxes represent 100% saturation. Now, in general, when you start having pixels that go over this 75% saturation line, your image can start looking a little crazy and you're gonna lose a lot of detail in your shot. So you wanna try to color inside the lines here in this Vectorscope. Also, if you're trying to get your video on broadcast TV or on some big network, they are not going to accept it if the saturation in your video is over this 75% boundary. Now, obviously, YouTube does not have this rule, right? But back in the day, before the days of digital, when we had analog TV, if you had footage that you were playing that had saturation or brightness levels that were way too high, it could actually give you technical problems with your broadcast. And I got some interesting stories from some industry veterans when I asked about this on Reddit, but anyway, let's get back to this Vectorscope YUV. Now, honestly, most of the time, if I'm adjusting the saturation on a clip, I am not looking at this scope. But I do check this scope when I am correcting my A-roll shots where my face is in it, and I wanna make sure that my skin is looking on point and not too saturated. So first, let's talk about how saturated skin should be. Well, that does depend on whose skin you're correcting. And in general, the maximum saturation that skin should have, human skin should have, is somewhere between 20 and 50%. Now, the lighter the skin is, or the darker the skin is, the less saturation it's gonna have. Because remember, a black and white image has 0 saturation. And so really light skin tones and really dark skin tones are the ones that are gonna be around this lower 20% saturation level. But when you start looking at medium skin tones or golden skin tones, then they are gonna have the most saturation. So they're the ones that are going to tend to be on the higher end toward 50%. So with those guidelines in mind, let's go back to our example here where we've got our subject's face looking too saturated. So if we look at the Vectorscope, we can see that oversaturation. So we can see that her skin is around 75% saturation, which is way too high, right? And so let's reduce the saturation of her skin down, and we're gonna do that in this HSL secondary section, because remember, that means none of the saturation on the rest of our image is gonna be impacted. And since we know that the max saturation for her skin should be somewhere between 20 and 50%, then I know that it shouldn't be way up here, and so I'll bring it back down. And since she's got more of a medium skin tone, I am thinking she should be more toward the higher end of this range, and I'm thinking somewhere in here is looking good. Now let's go back and look at our whole image here, and we'll look at the before and now the after. You can see that her skin is looking much more natural. All right, if I wanted to make any further adjustments to her skin, then I could do that down here in these correction settings. So I could use this trio of color wheels here to change the hue, or these vertical sliders to make things lighter or darker, or these sliders at the bottom. And again, any adjustments I make here in the correction section of HSL secondary will only apply to our secondary selection here. By the way, that's the really amazing part about this section. So remember, our selection here is based on hue, saturation, and lightness. And so that means our selection is going to move as our subject moves. And that means any adjustments that we make to that selection are also gonna move with our subject just seamlessly. And we're gonna get way better results than if we had tried to mask my skin and then we tried to make sure that that mask tracked my motion and that the mask changed shape as my skin changes shape and I'm moving around. This is just way better. And so that's why this HSL secondary section is so dang powerful. But even though it's great for skin tones, you can also use it for other applications. So for example, let's say we've got this shot of a toothbrush product box and we want to make sure that the color of this box exactly matches the official brand color, which is not happening right now. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to hide our new shot for a second so that only our official brand color shot is showing. And then I'm going to go over to the effects panel and grab the crop effect. And I'm going to use that to crop in so that only the color of that product box is showing. All right, now if we look over at our Vectorscope YUV, y'all, we can see exactly what hue our official brand color is. So it is along this line between yellow and green on the Vectorscope. So now that we know this, let's bring back our new shot so that we can match things up. And I'm gonna hide that other official shot for a second. Now I'm gonna go over to Lumetri Color and I'm gonna select our new shot here because we're gonna use the HSL secondary section in this panel to key out and select all of the pixels in that product box so that we can manipulate them without messing up the rest of our image. All right, now we can look at our Vectorscope YUV and see what color this new box is. And if we go back and remind ourselves what our official brand color was, it is obvious that the box in this new shot is way too far over here toward the cyan on this Vectorscope. And so let's bring back that shot with our official brand color. And now that we have both of these on screen, we can also see both of these in the Vectorscope, and we can make some adjustments down here in the correction section and make these pixels in the Vectorscope match up better. And yes, honey, this is looking good, but let's check our work. So we can see that these two boxes are looking nice and matched up, especially if we go look at the before, then y'all, we have done so well here. All right, y'all, congrats. We have made it through another section in the Lumetri color panel. Up in the next video, we're gonna go through the last section, which is a very quick and easy one, and then we're gonna break for a triple P. So I'll see you there.